My name is Neil Blackwood, and I'm the guy who fixes things for a living. Mechanical engineer by trade, problem solver by nature. Too bad I didn't see the biggest problem brewing right under my nose until it was almost too late. Tessa told me they were meeting for coffee to stay civil. Her ex-boyfriend Julian Cross had reached out after 3 years of silence, claiming he wanted to clear the air about their messy breakup. She presented it as mature, responsible behavior, the kind of thing adults do when they've moved on with their lives. "It's just coffee, Neil," she said that Tuesday morning, adjusting her hair in the hallway mirror. "We both agreed we should talk things through properly. Closure." I nodded from behind my newspaper, sipping my own coffee, the kind I made myself every morning in our kitchen, not the overpriced stuff from downtown cafes. "Sure, honey. Whatever helps you sleep at night." She shot me a look I couldn't quite decipher. "It's about being mature, Neil. You wouldn't understand." That stung a little, but I let it slide. Tessa worked in human resources at a mid-sized consulting firm, and she was always talking about conflict resolution and professional communication. If she wanted to have coffee with Julian Cross to achieve some kind of emotional equilibrium, who was I to argue? The first meeting happened on a Wednesday afternoon. She came home around 6, chatting about her day as if nothing unusual had occurred. The coffee meeting got exactly 30 seconds of airtime. It went fine. We talked. Very civil. I think we both feel better about everything now. I expected that to be the end of it. 2 weeks later, she mentioned another coffee meeting. "Julian texted," she said, waving her phone casually. "He thinks we should continue the conversation. There are still some unresolved issues from when we dated." This time I looked up from the engineering report I was reviewing. "What kind of unresolved issues? You guys broke up 3 years ago." "Emotional stuff," she said vaguely. "It's complicated, Neil, but it's important for both of us to work through it properly." I watched her face carefully. Tessa had always been good at maintaining composure. It was part of her job, but something seemed different. Her smile was a little too bright, her tone a little too casual. "How long are these coffee sessions supposed to last?" I asked. "As long as they need to," she replied, already heading upstairs to change clothes. The second meeting lasted 3 hours. I know because I checked the time when she left and when she returned. 3 hours seemed like a lot of time to spend achieving closure with an ex-boyfriend, but what did I know? Maybe they had a lot to work through. The third meeting happened the following week. This time, Tessa came home with a subtle glow about her, the kind of energy people get when they've had a particularly good day. She hummed while making dinner and seemed unusually affectionate, running her fingers through my hair while I sat at the kitchen table. "Good coffee session?" I asked. "Very productive," she said. "Julian's really matured since we dated. He's engaged now, actually, to this woman named Audrey who owns a boutique downtown." I filed that information away without really thinking about it. At the time, it seemed reassuring. If Julian was engaged to someone else, then these coffee meetings really were just about closure and civility. The fourth meeting lasted 4 hours. The fifth meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon, which struck me as odd timing for closure-seeking coffee. Tessa said Julian could only meet on weekends because of his work schedule. "What does he do again?" I asked. "Marketing," she said. "Same company I work for, actually. Different department." That was news to me. Tessa had never mentioned that Julian worked at her company. In fact, I was pretty sure she'd told me he worked somewhere else entirely when they first started these coffee meetings. The sixth meeting happened on a Tuesday evening. Tessa came home at 9:30, apologizing for being late. "We lost track of time," she said. "You know how it is when you're really getting into deep conversation." I didn't know how it was, actually. I'd never spent 4.5 hours having deep conversation with any of my ex-girlfriends, but then again, maybe I wasn't as emotionally sophisticated as my wife and her ex-boyfriend. It was after the 7th meeting that I started paying closer attention to details. Tessa had always been meticulous about her appearance, But lately she'd been taking extra care with her outfits on coffee days. New perfume appeared on her dresser, something floral and expensive that she'd never worn around me. Her phone, which used to sit casually on countertops and tables, now stayed face down and within arm's reach at all times. The real wake-up call came on a Thursday morning in early October. I was looking for my insurance papers in the drawer where we kept important documents, and I found a stack of receipts that Tessa had apparently been collecting. Most were routine: grocery stores, gas stations, the usual household expenses. But 3 of them made me stop and look twice. Victoria's Secret, $97, purchased the day before her 5th coffee meeting. La Perla, $163, purchased 2 days before her 7th coffee meeting. Agent Provocateur, $212, purchased the morning of her most recent coffee session with Julian. I stared at those receipts for a long time, trying to come up with an innocent explanation. Maybe Tessa was treating herself to new lingerie as part of some personal confidence-building exercise. Maybe she was planning a surprise for me and hadn't had the chance to spring it yet. But as I thought back over the past 2 months, I couldn't remember seeing any of the items described on those receipts. No black lace chemise, no silk camisole set, no red push-up ensemble with matching accessories. I put the receipts back exactly where I'd found them and went to work, but I couldn't concentrate on anything all day. My mind kept circling back to those numbers and dates, trying to make sense of the timeline. That evening, I paid closer attention to Tessa's behavior. She was checking her phone more frequently than usual, and twice I caught her smiling at the screen in a way that seemed private and secretive. When I asked what was so amusing, she said it was just something funny that her friend Rhonda had posted on social media. I asked to see it. Tessa hesitated for just a moment before saying she'd already scrolled past it and couldn't find it again. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before in our 8 years of marriage. I looked through Tessa's phone while she was in the shower. I didn't find anything incriminating in her text messages, but I did notice that her recent call log showed several conversations with Julian that she hadn't mentioned. Short calls, mostly, but frequent. Almost daily. I also noticed that her photo gallery had been recently organized. Usually, Tessa's photos were a chaotic mix of random snapshots, work events, and pictures of our cat. But now everything was sorted into albums with generic names like Recent and Misc. I didn't have time to investigate further because I heard the shower turning off, but I'd seen enough to confirm that my suspicions weren't entirely paranoid. That weekend, Tessa announced that she and Julian were meeting for coffee again on Sunday afternoon. "We're really making progress," she said. "I think we're both learning a lot about ourselves through these conversations." "That's great," I said. "Maybe I should try having deep conversations with my ex-girlfriends. For personal growth." Tessa laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's different, Neil. Julian and I have a lot more history to work through." Sunday afternoon came, and Tessa left the house wearing a new dress I'd never seen before. She'd done her hair in loose curls and applied makeup with the kind of care usually reserved for special occasions. "You look nice," I said. "Thank you," she replied, checking herself in the mirror one more time. "I want to look presentable. Julian always dresses professionally for our meetings." After she left, I sat in our living room staring out the window, trying to decide what to do with the growing certainty that my wife was having an affair. I could confront her directly, but I knew Tessa well enough to predict how that conversation would go. She'd deny everything, accuse me of being paranoid and controlling, and probably turn the whole situation around to make me feel guilty for not trusting her. Without concrete proof, I'd just be the jealous husband making unfounded accusations. I could hire a private investigator, but that seemed like overkill. Plus, I was a mechanical engineer. I was good at solving problems and gathering evidence. Maybe I could handle this investigation myself. Or I could ignore the whole thing and hope it would resolve itself naturally. Maybe these coffee meetings really were innocent, and I was letting my imagination run wild. Maybe Tessa was buying expensive lingerie for me and just hadn't found the right moment to surprise me with it. But even as I tried to convince myself of that possibility, I knew I didn't believe it. Tessa came home at 8:30 that evening, humming softly and moving with the kind of relaxed energy that comes after a particularly satisfying day. She kissed my cheek and asked what I wanted for dinner, as if nothing unusual had happened. "How was your coffee?" I asked. "Really good," she said. "Julian and I are definitely making progress. I think we're both ready to move forward now." "Does that mean the coffee meetings are ending?" Tessa paused in the middle of opening the refrigerator. "Well, we want to make sure we've really worked through everything properly. It would be a shame to rush the process and leave things unfinished." That night, lying in bed next to my wife, I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what kind of progress Tessa and Julian were making during their civil coffee meetings, and I was going to document everything I found. Because if my suspicions were correct, civility was about to become a luxury I could no longer afford. Monday morning, I started my investigation the way any good engineer approaches a complex problem, by gathering data and establishing patterns. I began with Tessa's schedule. Over the past 2 months, she'd met Julian for coffee 9 times. The meetings were becoming more frequent, initially every 2 weeks, now twice a week. The duration was also increasing, from an hour and a half for the first meeting to over 4 hours for the most recent ones. Tuesday evening, while Tessa was taking one of her increasingly long showers, I photographed the lingerie receipts with my phone. I also noted the dates and cross-referenced them with her coffee meetings. The correlation was perfect. Every expensive lingerie purchase happened within 24 hours of a meeting with Julian. Wednesday, I created a fake social media account and started researching Julian Cross. It didn't take long to find his profiles. He was exactly as I remembered him from the few times Tessa and I had run into him around town during the early years of our marriage. Tall, conventionally handsome, with the kind of easy smile that probably worked well in marketing. His relationship status was listed as engaged to Audrey Sinclair. I clicked through to her profile and found myself looking at a woman who appeared to be everything Tessa wasn't. Blonde where Tessa was brunette, bubbly where Tessa was reserved, artistic where Tessa was corporate. Audrey's feed was full of pictures from her boutique, behind-the-scenes shots of her arranging displays and helping customers. She seemed genuinely happy and excited about her upcoming wedding. Her most recent posts were about venue shopping and dress fittings. She'd even created a hashtag for the wedding, Audrey and Julian Forever. Looking at those pictures, I felt something twist in my stomach. This woman had no idea that her fiancé was spending multiple hours every week having civil conversations with his ex-girlfriend. She was planning their future, while he was apparently revisiting his past. Thursday, I decided to conduct some field research. Tessa had mentioned that she and Julian usually met at a coffee shop called Grind Coffee downtown. I took a long lunch break and drove over to scout the location. Grind Coffee turned out to be one of those trendy places with exposed brick walls, vintage furniture, and baristas who took their craft very seriously. It was busy enough to provide cover for a cheating couple, but intimate enough for private conversation. The kind of place where 2 people could sit for hours without attracting attention. I ordered a cappuccino and found a table with a good view of the entrance. Then I settled in to wait and observe. I didn't see Tessa and Julian that day, but I learned something valuable about the coffee shop's layout and customer patterns. There were several secluded corners where 2 people could have a very private conversation. The lighting was dim enough to create an intimate atmosphere, and most importantly, there was a back exit that led to a small parking area behind the building. Friday evening, Tessa announced that she and Julian were meeting for coffee again on Saturday afternoon. "We're really getting into some deep emotional territory," she said. "It's intense, but I think it's exactly what we both need." "How much deeper can you get?" I asked. "You've been working through this emotional stuff for 2 months now." Tessa gave me a patient smile, the kind she probably used with difficult employees at work. "Healing takes time, Neil. Julian and I hurt each other pretty badly when we broke up. We're both committed to doing this right. Saturday morning, I made my own commitment. I was going to follow my wife to her coffee meeting and see exactly what kind of healing was taking place. Tessa left the house at 2 o'clock, wearing a new outfit I'd never seen before. A fitted black dress that showed off her figure, paired with heels that added 3 inches to her height. She'd spent over an hour getting ready, styling her hair and applying makeup with meticulous care. I waited 10 minutes after she left, then got in my car and drove to grind coffee. I parked across the street where I had a clear view of both the front entrance and the back parking area. At 2:30, I spotted Tessa's car pulling into the back parking lot. A few minutes later, a silver Audi parked next to her. Julian got out, and even from a distance, I could see that he'd dressed up for the occasion too. Pressed khakis, button-down shirt, sport jacket. They met at the back entrance, and I watched Julian lean in to give Tessa a hug that lasted several seconds longer than seemed appropriate for a casual coffee meeting between exes seeking closure. I sat in my car for the next 4 hours, taking pictures with my phone's zoom lens and documenting the timestamps. At 6:15, they finally emerged from the back entrance. This time, Julian's arm was around Tessa's waist, and she was laughing at something he'd said. They stood by their cars talking for another 15 minutes, and just before they separated, Julian cupped Tessa's face in his hands and kissed her. Not a friendly peck on the cheek. A real kiss, the kind that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. I photographed that too. Sunday morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The uncertainty was over. I now had concrete evidence that my wife was having an affair with her ex-boyfriend. The question was what to do with that information. I could confront Tessa immediately, but that would only give her the opportunity to come up with explanations and excuses. She might even convince Julian to back up whatever story she decided to tell. I could confront Julian directly, but that seemed pointless. He was cheating on his fiancée just as much as Tessa was cheating on me. He had no moral high ground to stand on and no reason to be honest with me. Or I could continue gathering evidence and plan a more strategic response. That afternoon, while Tessa was visiting her sister, I went through her belongings more thoroughly. In the back of her closet, I found a garment bag containing items that matched the descriptions on the lingerie receipts. The black lace chemise, the silk camisole set, the red ensemble with matching accessories. All of them still had the tags attached. None of them had ever been worn for me. I also found a small gift bag hidden behind her winter coats. Inside was a men's watch, expensive, elegant, still in its original box. The receipt showed that Tessa had purchased it 3 days earlier. I was pretty sure it wasn't intended as an early Christmas present for me. Monday evening, I made another discovery that changed everything. I was using our shared laptop to check my email when I noticed that Tessa's cloud storage account was still logged in. Curious, I clicked through to her photo library. Most of the pictures were innocuous. Work events, family gatherings, random snapshots. But buried in a folder labeled MISC 2 were dozens of photos that told the real story of Tessa's coffee meetings with Julian. Pictures of them together at restaurants that definitely weren't grind coffee. Photos of Julian wearing the watch I'd found in Tessa's closet. Images of Tessa modeling the lingerie she'd been buying. Pictures that were clearly meant for Julian's eyes, not mine. And then I found the one that made my hands shake with anger. A selfie of Tessa wearing the red lingerie set, taken in what was obviously a hotel room. The timestamp showed it had been taken the previous Saturday, during their 4-hour coffee meeting. At the bottom of the photo, Tessa had added a caption, "Can't wait for next time." I sat staring at that picture for a long time, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was documenting it, celebrating it, planning future encounters. And she was doing all of this while lying to my face every single day about civil coffee meetings and emotional closure. That night, lying next to Tessa while she slept peacefully, I started planning my response. I wasn't going to confront her or plead with her or try to work things out through couples counseling. I was going to make sure that everyone involved in this situation understood exactly what civility really looked like. Starting with Julian's fiancée, Audrey, who deserved to know what kind of man she was planning to marry, and ending with a reckoning that would leave no doubt about the consequences of betrayal. Tuesday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I had more important things to do than troubleshoot mechanical systems. I had a gift to prepare. I drove to an office supply store and purchased a sturdy cardboard box, bubble wrap, manila envelopes, and a package of plain white labels. Everything needed to be untraceable, professional-looking, and impossible to ignore. Back home, I spread everything out on my kitchen table and began assembling what I'd come to think of as Audrey's wake-up call. First, I printed out copies of all the photographs I'd taken during my surveillance of Tessa and Julian. The images were clear and damning, Julian with his arm around Tessa's waist, the two of them kissing by their cars, Tessa entering and leaving what was obviously not a coffee shop on several occasions. Next, I printed copies of the lingerie receipts, organizing them chronologically and highlighting the dates with a yellow marker. I included a simple timeline showing how each purchase corresponded with one of Tessa's coffee meetings. The hotel receipts came next. I'd found them buried in Tessa's email account, confirmation numbers for afternoon reservations at 3 different downtown hotels over the past month. I printed those out too, along with the credit card statements showing the charges. Finally, I included copies of some of the more revealing text messages I'd found in Tessa's phone. Nothing explicit enough to be embarrassing, but clear enough to establish the true nature of her relationship with Julian. I arranged everything in the box carefully, adding a brief typewritten note. Thought you should know what your fiancé has been doing during his lunch breaks. A concerned friend. No signature, no return address, nothing that could be traced back to me. I looked up Audrey's boutique online and found the address. According to her social media posts, she usually took lunch breaks around noon and often ate in the small office behind her store. Perfect timing for a private delivery. Wednesday morning, I drove downtown and parked outside Audrey's boutique. Through the window, I could see her helping a customer, smiling brightly and gesturing animatedly as she showed off different outfits. She looked so genuinely happy that I almost lost my nerve. This woman was about to have her world turned upside down, and I was the one who was going to do it. For a moment, I wondered if I should just confront Tessa directly and leave Audrey out of it entirely. But then I remembered the hotel receipts and the lingerie photos and the watch hidden in my wife's closet. Audrey deserved to know the truth before she married someone who was already cheating on her. At 11:30, I walked into the boutique carrying the box. Audrey looked up from her customer with the same bright smile. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. "Delivery for Audrey Sinclair," I said, keeping my voice neutral and professional. "That's me." She looked surprised. "I wasn't expecting anything today." "Someone wanted to make sure you got this personally," I said, handing her the box. "Have a good day." I left before she could ask any questions and drove to a coffee shop 2 blocks away where I could monitor the situation from a safe distance. At 12:15, my phone buzzed with a text message from Tessa. "Can you call me? Something weird is happening." I ignored it. At 12:30, Tessa called. I let it go to voicemail. At 12:45, she called again. This time I answered. "Neil, where are you?" Her voice was strained, barely controlled. "At work," I lied. "What's going on?" "Julian's fiancée just showed up at our office. She's making a scene in the lobby, screaming about cheating and lies. Security is trying to calm her down, but she's demanding to see both Julian and me." "That's terrible," I said, working hard to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "What do you think happened?" "I have no idea. Julian is freaking out. He thinks someone saw us together and told her about our coffee meetings." "Well, that would be unfortunate," I said, "especially if she misunderstood the nature of your relationship." There was a long pause. Neil, I need to go. This situation is getting out of hand. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, watching social media for any updates. Audrey had posted a brief message on her boutique's page. Store closed today due to personal emergency. Sorry for any inconvenience. That evening, Tessa came home looking like she'd been through a war. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her hands were shaking as she poured herself a large glass of wine. "Rough day?" I asked. She looked at me with eyes that were red from crying. "Audrey broke up with Julian. She showed up at our office with this box full of pictures and receipts and hotel confirmations. She accused him of having an affair with me." "That's crazy," I said. "Where would she get that idea?" "Someone has been following us, Neil, taking pictures, going through our personal information. Audrey had evidence of things that happened weeks ago. Someone planned this whole thing." I nodded sympathetically. "That's really disturbing. Who would do something like that?" Tessa shook her head. "I don't know, but Julian thinks it might be someone from work. Maybe someone who was jealous of his engagement or his job performance." "What did you tell Audrey when she confronted you?" I tried to explain that Julian and I were just having coffee to work through some old issues, but she wouldn't listen. She kept waving around these pictures and receipts, saying they proved we were having an affair. "Were the pictures real?" Another pause, longer this time. "They were taken out of context, Neil. Julian and I have been spending time together, yes, but it's not what it looked like." I studied my wife's face carefully. Even now, caught red-handed with photographic evidence, she was still trying to maintain the fiction that her relationship with Julian was innocent. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I don't know. Julian is devastated. Audrey gave him back his ring and told him she never wanted to see him again. She also posted something on social media about calling off the wedding." "And what about you and Julian?" Tessa looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" "Well, if Julian is single now, and you two have been working through your old relationship issues, maybe this is actually a good thing. Maybe you can finally get the closure you've been looking for." "It's not that simple, Neil. I'm married to you. Julian and I were just trying to resolve some emotional baggage from our past." "Right," I said. "The emotional baggage that required hotel rooms and expensive lingerie." The wine glass slipped from Tessa's hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. She stared at me with a mixture of shock and fear. "What did you say?" I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the pictures I'd taken outside Grind Coffee. "I said it's amazing what kind of emotional baggage requires hotel rooms and expensive lingerie." Tessa's face went completely pale. "Neil, I can explain—" "I'm sure you can," I interrupted. "But I'm not really interested in explanations right now. I'm more interested in discussing what happens next." "What do you mean?" I showed her another picture, this one of Julian kissing her by their cars. "I mean that your civil coffee meetings are about to become a lot less civil." Tessa sank into a chair, her whole body trembling. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to document everything thoroughly," I said. "Long enough to make sure Audrey got all the evidence she needed to make an informed decision about her future." "You sent her that box." "I sent her the truth. Something she deserved to have before marrying a cheater." Tears started flowing down Tessa's cheeks. "Neil, please. Let me explain what really happened." "I know what really happened, Tessa. I have pictures and receipts and hotel confirmations. I have text messages and credit card statements and a closet full of lingerie you never wore for me." I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, where I'd left a manila envelope containing copies of everything I'd sent to Audrey. "The question isn't what happened," I continued. "The question is what you're going to do about it now that everyone knows." I handed her the envelope. Because Audrey wasn't the only person who received a gift today. Tessa opened the envelope with shaking hands and found copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, along with a list of names: her parents, her sister, her best friend Rhonda, several colleagues from work, and a few mutual friends who would be very interested to know why Julian's engagement had ended so suddenly. You didn't, she whispered. I did, I confirmed. Everyone on that list received their own copy of the evidence, along with a brief explanation of the situation. I thought it was important for people to understand why Audrey was so upset today. Tessa looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of terror, rage, and disbelief. You've ruined everything, she said. No, I replied calmly. You ruined everything. I just made sure everyone knew about it. My phone started ringing. According to the caller ID, it was Tessa's sister, Cassie. You should probably answer that, I said. I'm sure she has questions. The phone calls started at 7:30 that evening and didn't stop until well past midnight. Tessa's sister Cassie was first, followed by her parents, her best friend Rhonda, and a parade of colleagues and acquaintances who had received my carefully prepared evidence packages. I listened from the living room as Tessa tried to explain the situation to each caller, her voice growing more strained and desperate with each conversation. She attempted different strategies: complete denial, partial admission with excuses, and finally tearful confessions followed by pleas for understanding. None of it worked very well. Her sister was furious. How could you do this to Neil? And that poor girl Audrey, she was planning a wedding, Tessa. Her parents were disappointed and confused. We don't understand, honey. You have a good marriage. Why would you risk everything for someone you dated years ago? Her best friend Rhonda was perhaps the most brutal. I knew something was going on. All those times you asked me to cover for you, saying you were with me when you were really with Julian. You made me an accomplice in your lies. By Thursday morning, Tessa looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hair was a mess, and she moved around the house like someone in shock. I can't go to work today, she said. Everyone there knows what happened. Julian isn't answering his phone, and I'm pretty sure HR is going to want to have a conversation about our relationship. Probably, I agreed. Workplace affairs can be complicated from a policy standpoint. She stared at me with red-rimmed eyes. How can you be so calm about this? I've had time to process the situation, I said. You're just catching up. That afternoon, while Tessa was hiding in our bedroom, I received an unexpected visitor. Julian Cross stood on my front porch, looking like he'd slept about as well as my wife. We need to talk, he said when I opened the door. Do we? I replied. I think the situation is pretty clear already. You don't understand what you've done, Julian continued. Audrey won't even speak to me. She's calling off the wedding, telling everyone I'm a cheater. My reputation is ruined. Your reputation should be ruined, I said. You were cheating. Julian's face flushed red. It wasn't like that. Tessa and I have history. We never meant for things to go as far as they did. How far did they go exactly? I asked. Because the hotel receipts suggest they went pretty far. Look, I know you're angry, but destroying my relationship with Audrey isn't going to fix your marriage. Tessa loves you. She made a mistake, but she loves you. I studied Julian's face for a moment. Even now, caught completely red-handed, he was trying to minimize the situation and shift responsibility. You know what I think, Julian? I think you're not really here because you're concerned about my marriage. I think you're here because your life just fell apart, and you're looking for someone to blame. That's not... I think you're here because Audrey won't take your calls. Your co-workers are gossiping about you, and you're realizing that actions have consequences. Julian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You had no right to interfere in my relationship. What happened between Tessa and me was none of your business. I almost laughed. None of my business? Julian, she's my wife. You were having an affair with my wife. That makes it very much my business. We weren't hurting anyone. You were hurting Audrey. You were hurting me. You were lying to people who trusted you and making plans behind their backs. The only reason you think no one was getting hurt is because you didn't care enough to notice. Julian's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually try to hit me. Instead, he took a step back and pointed a finger at my chest. "This isn't over," he said. "You think you're so smart, playing detective and ruining people's lives, but you have no idea what you've started." "I didn't start anything," I replied. "I just finished it." After Julian left, I went back inside to find Tessa standing at the top of the stairs, having obviously listened to the entire conversation. "He's right, you know," she said. "This isn't over. You can't just destroy people's lives and expect everything to go back to normal." "I didn't destroy anyone's life, Tessa. You and Julian made choices. I just made sure those choices had consequences. You're being vindictive and cruel. I'm being honest, something you might want to try sometime." That evening, the situation escalated further. Tessa's friend Rhonda showed up at our house, clearly having spent some time at a bar before deciding to pay us a visit. "I need to talk to both of you," she announced, pushing past me into the living room where Tessa was sitting on the couch. "Rhonda, you're intoxicated," Tessa said. "Maybe we should do this another time." "No, we're doing this now," Rhonda replied, swaying slightly as she pointed an accusing finger at my wife. "Do you have any idea how many lies you've told me over the past 2 months? How many times you asked me to cover for you?" "I never asked you to lie. You told people you were with me when you were really with Julian. You used our friendship to hide your affair, and now everyone knows, and they're all asking me what I knew and when I knew it." I watched this confrontation with interest. I hadn't expected the social fallout to spread quite this quickly, but apparently word traveled fast in Tessa's circle of friends. "Rhonda, please calm down," Tessa said. "I never meant to put you in an awkward position." "Awkward position?" Rhonda's voice rose to a near shout. "I defended you. When people started gossiping about you and Julian, I told them they were wrong. I said you would never cheat on Neil because you were too smart and too decent." She turned to look at me. "And you? How long did you know about this before you decided to blow up everyone's life?" "Long enough to gather evidence," I said. "You could have talked to Tessa privately. You could have handled this like an adult instead of sending anonymous packages to everyone we know." "I could have," I agreed. "But then Julian would still be engaged to a woman who deserved to know the truth about her fiancé. And Tessa would still be lying to everyone about her civil coffee meetings." Rhonda stared at me for a moment, then shook her head. "You're both horrible people," she said finally. "Tessa for cheating, and you for handling it like this." She left without saying goodbye, slamming the front door behind her. "Well," I said to Tessa, "I guess that's one friendship you won't have to worry about maintaining." Tessa buried her face in her hands. "Everyone hates me now. My family is disappointed, my friends feel betrayed, and my co-workers are gossiping about me. You've turned my entire life into a disaster." "Your affair turned your life into a disaster," I corrected. "I just made sure the disaster was visible to everyone it affected." "What do you want from me, Neil? What will it take for you to stop punishing me?" I sat down in the chair across from her and considered the question seriously. "I want you to understand something, Tessa. This isn't about punishment. This is about consequences. For 2 months, you lied to me every single day. You spent our money on lingerie for another man. You used our shared accounts to book hotel rooms where you could cheat on me. You involved our friends in your deception and made them unwitting accomplices in your affair. I know I made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. Deliberate, calculated choices. And now everyone gets to see what those choices really were." Tessa looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "So what happens now? Do you want a divorce? Do you want me to move out? What's your end game here?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet suburban street. My end game is making sure that everyone involved in this situation understands the real cost of betrayal. Julian thought he could have an affair without consequences. You thought you could lie to me indefinitely without getting caught. Both of you were wrong. And Audrey, what about her? She didn't do anything wrong, but you destroyed her relationship too. I saved Audrey from marrying a cheater. She'll thank me eventually. You don't know that. I know she deserved better than Julian, just like I deserved better than being lied to for 2 months. I turned back to face my wife. The question now is whether you're capable of being honest about what you've done, or if you're going to keep trying to minimize and excuse your way out of this situation. Tessa wiped her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been resignation. What do you want me to say, Neil? I want you to say that you understand why I did what I did. I want you to acknowledge that your actions had consequences that extended far beyond just you and Julian. And I want you to stop acting like I'm the villain in this story. And then what? If I say all of that, will you forgive me? Will we try to work things out? I considered her question for a long moment. I honestly don't know, Tessa, but I do know that any chance of working things out starts with you taking full responsibility for what you've done. And if I can't do that, then I guess we'll find out just how civil our own divorce proceedings can be. Friday morning brought new developments. Tessa received a call from her HR department requesting a meeting to discuss recent events that may impact the workplace environment. Julian, apparently, had already been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into their relationship. They're going to fire me, Tessa said, pacing around our kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. My career is over because of your vindictive little stunt. Your career is in jeopardy because you had an affair with a coworker, I corrected. Most companies have policies about that sort of thing. After Tessa left for her meeting, I decided to do some additional research on Julian Cross. If he was going to show up at my house making threats, I wanted to know exactly who I was dealing with. What I found was interesting. Julian's social media presence painted a picture of someone who lived well beyond his means. Expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, designer clothes, and that flashy Audi he drove, all on a marketing coordinator's salary. I dug deeper and found some public records that raised additional questions. Julian had been sued twice in the past 3 years for unpaid debts. He'd also had his wages garnished for defaulting on a credit card payment. This was someone with serious financial problems, which made his expensive gift-giving to Tessa even more suspicious. Where was he getting the money for hotel rooms and expensive dinners? I was still researching when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Is this Neil Blackwood? The voice was female, young, and clearly upset. Yes, who is this? This is Audrey Sinclair. I think we need to talk. An hour later, I was sitting across from Julian's ex-fiancée in a coffee shop downtown. Ironically, just 3 blocks from the place where Tessa and Julian had been conducting their civil meetings. Audrey looked exhausted. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore no makeup. But her eyes were clear and focused, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. I want to thank you, she said without preamble, for sending me that box, for making sure I knew the truth before I made the biggest mistake of my life. I'm sorry you had to find out that way, I replied. But I thought you deserved to know. I did deserve to know, and apparently I was the only person in Julian's life who didn't already suspect something was going on. She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages. These are from Julian's friends and coworkers. They've been sending me messages since yesterday, telling me they're glad I found out about the affair. Apparently, everyone knew except me. I read through the messages with growing anger. Julian's friends had known about the affair and said nothing. His co-workers had seen him with Tessa and kept quiet. Everyone had let Audrey continue planning a wedding to a man who was cheating on her. That's horrible, I said. I'm sorry. The worst part is that I defended him, Audrey continued. When people made jokes about Julian working late or having lunch meetings, I told them they were being paranoid. I trusted him completely. That's not your fault, isn't it? Looking back, there were so many signs. The unexplained expenses, the secretive phone calls, the way he started dressing differently and wearing cologne I'd never smelled before. She paused to wipe her eyes. I found something else after I broke up with him. Julian has been stealing money from my boutique. Small amounts, taken from the cash register over several months. I think he was using my money to pay for his affair with your wife. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Julian been cheating on his fiancée, he'd been stealing from her to finance the affair. Have you reported this to the police? I asked. Not yet. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how much he took. But it's at least several $1,000s. We sat in silence for a moment, both processing the full scope of Julian's betrayal. What are you going to do now? I asked. I'm going to rebuild my life, Audrey said with quiet determination. I'm going to focus on my business, surround myself with people I can trust, and try to learn from this experience. That sounds like a good plan. What about you? Are you going to try to work things out with Tessa? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself repeatedly over the past few days. I honestly don't know, I said. Right now, I'm focused on making sure there are consequences for what she and Julian did. Beyond that, I haven't decided. Audrey nodded. I understand. But can I give you some advice? Sure. Don't let their betrayal turn you into someone you don't want to be. I've been angry for the past 2 days. Angrier than I've ever been in my life. But I don't want to stay angry forever. I don't want what they did to define who I become. I thought about that conversation for the rest of the afternoon. Was I letting anger and desire for revenge turn me into someone I didn't want to be? Or was I simply making sure that actions had consequences? That evening, Tessa came home from her HR meeting, looking defeated. They're conducting a full investigation, she reported. They've interviewed Julian, several of our co-workers, and they want to talk to anyone who might have knowledge of our relationship. What did you tell them? The truth. That Julian and I had been meeting outside of work to discuss personal matters, and that our relationship had become inappropriate. That's one way to put it. Tessa sat down heavily at the kitchen table. They're probably going to fire both of us. The company has a strict policy against romantic relationships between employees, especially when they're not disclosed to HR. You knew about that policy when you started your affair. Yes, I knew about it. It was the first time Tessa had used the word affair to describe her relationship with Julian. Progress, I supposed. There's something else, she continued. Julian's fiancée, ex-fiancée, contacted my supervisor today. She told them that Julian had been stealing money from her business, possibly to pay for expenses related to our relationship. I know. I talked to Audrey this afternoon. Tessa looked surprised. You talked to her? She called me. She wanted to thank me for sending her the evidence about Julian's cheating. What else did she tell you? That Julian's been stealing money from her boutique. That his friends and co-workers all knew about your affair but didn't tell her. That she's considering pressing charges against him. Tessa's face went pale. Charges for what? Theft, fraud, maybe more, depending on what else she discovers. Neil, I had no idea Julian was stealing money. I would never have been involved with someone who... Someone who what? Someone who lies and cheats and steals? Because from where I'm sitting, that describes both of you pretty accurately. I never stole anything. You stole time from our marriage. You stole trust from our relationship. You stole money from our joint accounts to pay for hotel rooms and lingerie for another man. Tessa started crying again, but this time her tears seemed different. Less self-pity, more genuine remorse. I don't know how to fix this, she said quietly. Maybe you can't fix it, I replied. Maybe some things, once broken, can't be put back together. Is that what you want? For our marriage to be over? I looked at my wife, really looked at her. for the first time in days. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her choices and their consequences. What I want is for you to understand that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. What I want is for you to acknowledge that your actions hurt multiple people, not just me. What I want is for you to take full responsibility for what you've done instead of trying to minimize it or blame me for exposing it. And if I do all of that, then maybe we can start having honest conversations about whether our marriage has a future. And if I can't, then I guess we'll both know where we stand. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Tessa cry softly beside me, I realized that my campaign of consequences was approaching its endgame. Julian's life was in ruins, his engagement over, his job in jeopardy, and potentially facing criminal charges. Tessa's career was probably finished, her friendships damaged, her family relationships strained. The question was whether any of this would actually lead to the accountability and understanding I was looking for, or whether I was just inflicting pain for its own sake. I was about to find out. Saturday morning, I woke to find Tessa already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad covered in handwriting. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she began without preamble, "about taking full responsibility and understanding the consequences of my actions." I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her, waiting. "I wrote down everything I did wrong," she continued, sliding the legal pad toward me. "Not just the affair itself, but all the lies I told, the people I hurt, the trust I broke." I scanned the list. It was comprehensive and brutal in its honesty. Lies told to me, to our friends, to her family, money spent on the affair, hotel reservations made with our joint credit card, the elaborate deception she'd maintained for months. "This is a good start," I said. "I also wrote down all the people who were hurt by my actions," she continued, flipping to the second page. "You, obviously, Audrey, our families, our friends who got caught up in my lies, even Julian, though I know you probably don't care about that." "You're right. I don't particularly care about Julian's feelings at this point. The thing is, Neil, I don't think I fully understood the scope of what I was doing while I was doing it. I told myself it was just coffee meetings, then just emotional conversations, then just a temporary thing that would run its course naturally. When did you know it had become something more than coffee meetings?" Tessa was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, the first time we met, there was still chemistry there, still unresolved feelings, but I convinced myself I could handle it, that I could maintain appropriate boundaries." "And the hotel rooms?" "That started about a month in. Julian said he wanted somewhere private where we could talk without being interrupted or overheard." "Talk." "At first, yes, but I know how that sounds now. I know what those hotel receipts look like to someone who wasn't there." I studied my wife's face. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I'd been fooled by her acting ability before. "What do you want from me now, Tessa?" "I want a chance to rebuild your trust. I want to go to counseling, both individual and couples therapy. I want to be completely transparent about everything, my phone, my email, my schedule, my whereabouts. And if I'm not interested in rebuilding anything, then I'll accept that. But I had to ask because despite everything that's happened, I do love you. I made horrible choices, but they weren't about not loving you." Before I could respond, there was a loud knock at our front door. Through the window, I could see Julian's silver Audi parked in our driveway. "He's not supposed to be here," Tessa said, looking nervous. I opened the door to find Julian looking even worse than he had during his previous visit. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his eyes had the wild look of someone who hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the house. "Julian, you shouldn't be here," Tessa said, standing up from the kitchen table. "My life is over," Julian announced dramatically. "Audrey is pressing charges for theft. My job is gone. My reputation is destroyed. And it's all because of him." He pointed an accusing finger at me. You couldn't just handle this like a man. You had to involve everyone, ruin everyone's life. I involved the people who were being lied to, I replied calmly. I gave them information they needed to make informed decisions about their relationships. You destroyed my engagement. You destroyed your engagement when you decided to cheat on your fiancée with a married woman. Julian's face flushed red with anger. Tessa and I have a connection that you could never understand. We have history, shared experiences. You have an affair, I interrupted. You have hotel receipts and stolen money and a trail of lies. That's not a connection, Julian. That's just cheating. You think you're so superior, don't you? The wronged husband, the victim, but you have no idea what your marriage was really like. Tessa was unhappy, Neil. She felt trapped and unappreciated. I looked at Tessa, who had gone completely pale. Is that true? Julian, stop, she said quietly. Tell him, Tessa. Tell him how you felt like you were living with a roommate instead of a husband. Tell him how you said you felt invisible in your own marriage. Julian, please don't do this. But Julian was past listening. Months of deception and the stress of his collapsing life had apparently pushed him beyond rational behavior. She told me you never talked to her anymore, never showed interest in her life, never made her feel desired or appreciated. She said she felt like she was married to a stranger. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Tessa, is that what you told him? Tessa's eyes filled with tears. Neil, I was trying to justify what I was doing. I was looking for reasons to make the affair seem acceptable. So you lied to him about our marriage the same way you lied to me about your affair. I exaggerated problems that didn't really exist. I made our relationship sound worse than it was, because it made me feel less guilty about being with Julian. Julian stared at her in shock. What are you saying? I'm saying I lied to you, Julian. About my marriage, about my feelings, about what I wanted. I told you what you wanted to hear because it made the affair easier to justify. That's not true. You said you were thinking about leaving Neil. You said you were only staying because of financial considerations. I never seriously considered leaving my husband for you, Julian. This was never about building a future together. It was about the excitement of doing something forbidden. I watched Julian's face as the full scope of his situation became clear to him. Not only had he lost his fiancée, his job, and potentially his freedom, but the woman he'd sacrificed everything for had been lying to him about her intentions the entire time. You used me, he said to Tessa. We used each other, she replied. We told each other whatever we needed to hear to justify what we were doing. Julian turned to me with desperate eyes. You have to help me fix this. Tell Audrey that Tessa seduced me, that I was manipulated. No, I said firmly. You made your choices, Julian. You chose to cheat on your fiancée. You chose to steal money from her business. You chose to lie to everyone in your life. Those were your decisions, and now you get to live with the consequences. This isn't over, Julian said, his voice rising. I'll tell everyone that Tessa came after me, that she pursued me. Go ahead, I said. Tell everyone whatever story makes you feel better. But it won't change the fact that you're a cheater and a thief who destroyed multiple relationships through your own selfish choices. Julian looked back and forth between Tessa and me, apparently realizing that neither of us was going to help him escape responsibility for his actions. You'll both regret this, he said finally. The only thing I regret, I replied, is not exposing your affair sooner. After Julian left, Tessa and I sat in our living room in silence for several minutes. Is it true? I asked finally. What you told Julian about our marriage? Some of it was true, she admitted. We had gotten into a routine, and sometimes I did feel like we were just going through the motions, but I exaggerated everything to make the affair seem more justified. Why didn't you talk to me about feeling disconnected? Because it was easier to have an affair than to do the hard work of fixing our problems. because Julian made me feel exciting and desired in a way that felt intoxicating. And now? Now I realize that excitement isn't the same thing as love, and that intoxication isn't the same thing as happiness. What Julian and I had was built on lies and deception. It felt exciting because it was forbidden, not because it was meaningful. I considered her words carefully. Where does that leave us? I don't know, Tessa said honestly. I've destroyed your trust, damaged our reputation, and hurt people we both care about. I don't know if that's something we can come back from. But you want to try? I want to try, but only if you do too, and only if you think there's a real chance of rebuilding something genuine. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and tried to see past the anger and betrayal to whatever might still exist between us. I think, I said slowly, that we should start with complete honesty about everything. No more secrets, no more lies, no more protecting each other's feelings at the expense of the truth. I can do that. And I think we need to understand that this process might lead us to realize that our marriage can't be saved. I understand. And I need you to know that forgiveness, if it comes at all, is going to take a very long time. I know. Outside, I could hear Julian's car starting up and driving away. The immediate crisis was over, but the real work of deciding our future was just beginning. There's one more thing, I said. What? I need you to understand that what I did, exposing the affair, sending evidence to Audrey, making sure there were consequences, I need you to understand that I don't regret any of it. Tessa nodded slowly. I'm starting to understand that everyone deserved to know the truth, Audrey especially. Good, because any chance we have of moving forward depends on you accepting that accountability isn't the same thing as revenge. I'm learning that, she said, the hard way. As we sat there in our living room, surrounded by the wreckage of lies and betrayal, I realized that this was either the end of our marriage or the beginning of something entirely different. Either way, the civil war between us was finally over.